Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Rachele Pojednic from Stanford Lifestyle Medicine, and I wanted to give you a little bit of history on the dietary guidelines for Americans. You have probably seen that the latest version for 2025 to 2030 has been released, and there has been a fair amount of controversy around these guidelines. And we at Stanford Lifestyle Medicine thought it might be a good idea to just let you know where these guidelines actually come from. So, at Stanford, I am faculty in the program on human biology, as well as the director of education at Stanford Lifestyle Medicine. Let me walk you through how we got here. So, first, what are the dietary guidelines? It's important to know that they're actually not really for you as the general consumer. The dietary guidelines are actually a policy document that form the basis of federal nutrition policy, education programs, outreach, and food assistance programs like SNAP, WIC, or school breakfasts and lunch. And they give the guardrails to what can be included and what cannot be included into these programs. And so then that trickles down to guiding local, state, and then other national health promotion and disease prevention initiatives. It also helps to inform various private organizations or industry to help, again, form these guidelines around what they can and can't say, what goes into and what can't go into different formulations. And it's really important to know that they are revised every 5 years. I've been seeing a couple headlines that say the dietary guidelines haven't been revised or updated in 5 years. That's actually very much by design. And you'll see why, because it actually takes a pretty significant amount of time to do the research and then update this document. So, up until very recently, you would have found the dietary guidelines for Americans on a website called dietaryguidelines.gov. And what has happened in the past couple of weeks is that this website has really become an archive website, if you will, for all of the guidelines up to the 2025 guidelines. More recently, you can now find the current version on a new website called realfood.gov, but we'll come to those guidelines in just a minute. So, one of the critical elements of the dietary guidelines that you need to know is that it's actually a three-part organization that comes together to create the guidelines themselves. So it starts with the government and with policymakers, and eventually they have the final say as to what goes into the document itself, which is hundreds of pages long. But you also have the input of stakeholders and lobbyists and the general public. And so lobbyists are going to naturally be in Washington, D.C. They've got the ear of the politicians that are creating the guidelines themselves. But you, as the general public, can also weigh in. And I'll show you in just a minute a website where anybody can go in and talk to the government and leave your comments about what you think should be important when they're considering creating the guidelines. And then the other piece that's been getting a lot of heat over the past couple of weeks is the scientific committee. Now, this is a group of people, as you'll see, that actually are experts in the field of nutrition. Most government and policy folks and most stakeholders are not necessarily nutrition experts. And so this is where we start to see the research being put into the process. So let's break down each of these elements. First, who is informing the guidelines from the policy and governmental perspective? This falls to two different organizations within the government, the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Human Services. And so currently for the 2025 to 2030 guidelines, Brooke Rollins is the Agricultural Secretary and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the Health and Human Services Secretary. Together, their staffs take the input of the scientific committee as well as the stakeholder groups, and they are the ones that are actually writing the report. So what you see is their interpretation, whether it's the executive summary, which this year is only 9 pages, it's typically about 40 to 50 pages, or the actual document itself. Remember, this policy document that's hundreds of pages long, they have the staffs that write that document themselves. And then let's skip over to the Scientific Advisory Committee. So, this, as I mentioned, is a group of experts in their field. There are 20 of them, and they are tapped to serve for 2 years prior to the guidelines being released to update all of the evidence that we might now know that has changed over the last iteration of the guidelines. And so each of them are chosen to answer very specific questions about the guidelines that are important and unique. So, for example, you might have somebody that is an expert in maternal health or in older adults or agriculture or processing. And so each of these people are tapped along with a small staff that they each get in order to do an investigation of the research themselves. So, what does that process look like? Well, the first thing that they do is they look at food patterns and how they've changed over the last 5 years. So, this is generally just consumption patterns. What are people buying? What are they reported eating? And so they really start to see if there are shifts in particular nutrients that are being consumed in a different way. And this will start to inform the nutrition facts panel that you might see on the backside of your packages. A couple of years ago, they changed the nutrients that are on the bottom because of these food pattern modeling analyses. And then what they do with their staffs is they go into the research and update what we know based upon the last 5 years worth of scientific literature. And so they do this in a couple of different ways. They go in and they look at the research themselves. They look at these very large systematic reviews, which are collections of the science. And from there, they can make updates. Did the work that we were doing change? So we learned new things for people investigating things in a unique way that might change our mind. Or have we come to a consensus and we have just sort of decided that, nope, everything is status quo, nothing major has changed. We're just going to leave it as is. So that's a process that takes approximately 2 years to do because there's so much science that these teams need to be going through. And they're answering, again, very specific questions within each of their area of expertise so that the guidelines are consistent year to year. But as I mentioned, there are also stakeholder groups, and you can get involved. Now, this was the website that was the login for the public this last iteration. So this was dietaryguidelines.gov, get involved. And you could go in, or anybody, and you could make a commentary on what the food environment that you're seeing, what things that you think the experts should be taking into consideration. And it's a really fascinating place to actually get a really colorful picture of the way that individuals perceive, use, eat the food in their local communities. So you might have a group that represents animal agriculture and the beef and dairy and cattle industry or farmers, and their comments come immediately before or after vegan advocacy groups. And so it's just a really interesting way to get a snapshot of what the communities within the United States are thinking about the food that is on their plate. Next, as I mentioned, within this stakeholder group, you can also get the special interest groups. So these are the lobbyists. And this is actually getting a lot of attention this go around because many of the scientists that were replaced, as you'll hear about in just a second, had ties to special interest groups. And we also have been getting reporting that the secretaries themselves have had ties to interest groups. So this is an area where it's not uncommon. It's not unusual at all in order to have the input of these interest groups. And they have had a pretty significant sway in previous iterations of the document. So this was a document where they were looking at the biases of the scientists themselves. They were also looking at the way that the lobbyists were able to form the guidance themselves. There was a really interesting report a couple of years ago where the scientific committee started to make recommendations based upon environmental impacts of the food and food consumption, and that never ended up in the guidelines, likely because there was lobbyist influence. So suffice it to say, it's really important to know that this document has never been clean, if you will. It's never based just upon the science. It's never based just upon stakeholder input. it really is this really fascinating amalgam of these three different interest groups. And it's also really fair to say that it's always been a very political document. I'm going to show you over the next couple of slides. We'll take a little history lesson as to how you can see the influence of these different groups in the shaping of the guidelines themselves. So let's go back to 1980. This is actually the very first guideline that was released. There were several decades and several years prior to this release of the actual first dietary guidelines. There were guides here and there were recommendations that were being made. There was no good consensus. And so people came together in 1980 to start this process to inform different political and policy related outcomes and programs. And so what you can see here, and I've just over the next several slides clipped the infographic that was the predominant infographic of that year, and some guidelines that were snapshotted from the guidelines, the hundreds of pages of documents themselves. And the reason that I want to do this is because right now there's a lot of hype. Oh, this has changed so much, that has changed so much. But I think what you'll see over the next several slides is it really is a bit more about semantics here or there. And the guidelines have been fairly consistent. And this is something as a nutrition researcher that I always struggle with because people are given headlines all the time. The nutrition guidelines are changing, recommendations are changing. And actually, the science itself and the guidelines themselves have been fairly consistent over the last 45 or so years. So here's the first one in 1980. What you can see is that we are eating a variety of food. We're maintaining an ideal weight. We're avoiding too much fat, particularly saturated fat and cholesterol. We are eating foods with adequate starch and fiber. We're avoiding too much sugar as well as sodium, which is salt. And if you drink alcohol, do so in moderation. Now, it's important to note some of the vocabulary that we are seeing here because directionality in the vocabulary matters because this is where you start to see some of the influence. So in this case, what we see is avoid, avoid, avoid. And on number 4 and number 1, we see eat. So it's don't do this, do this. Next up, the guidelines come up in 1985. Remember, they are iterated every 5 years. So again, we're eating a variety of foods. We're maintaining a desirable weight. We're avoiding too much fat. We're eating foods with adequate starch and fiber. We're avoiding too much sugar as well as sodium. And if we're drinking in moderation. Now, one of the things to look at here is this is where the saturated fat recommendations show up. So we're recommending people choose lean meat, fish, poultry, and dry beans and peas as protein sources. Now, this is interesting to me because everybody is kind of losing their minds over the change in the recommendations of protein. And this is pretty consistent if you look at the 1985 compared to the 2025 guidelines. But we'll come to that as we get there. But the language really hasn't changed that much. Now, the thing that got sticky a little bit is this idea of eating starch and fiber. So a lot of times these language don't translate very well to the general population. So most people don't know where they get their starch and fiber from, which is kind of problematic. But when we're looking at the sources of fiber and starch, we see whole grain breads and cereals, fruits, vegetables, dry beans, peas, nuts. And we're substituting starchy foods for those that have a higher, large amounts of fats and sugar. So basically saying, take the whole food carbohydrates and substitute them for processed foods. Sound familiar? All right, so 1990 rolls around, and this is where we start to see a little bit of language shifting. So what we can see here is that the infographic on the left, we're eating a variety of foods, we're maintaining a healthy weight. Remember that changed from desirable. We're choosing a diet low in fat. We're choosing a diet with plenty of vegetables, fruits, and grain products. We're using sugars only in moderation, as well as salt and sodium. And if we're drinking alcohol in moderation. So now what you can see is a change in direction. Rather than avoiding, we are giving an action item to choose. That is a direct reflection of the stakeholder groups that are coming in. So what you can see here is that salt and sodium, as well as the sugar lobby, probably had an input here because we've changed from avoid to use. And then what we can also see is that we've changed the words starch and fiber to vegetables, fruits, and grain products. And again, what you can see here is just to highlight the language really hasn't changed very much. So, for example, what we mean by sugars, we're talking about table sugar, brown sugar, high fructose corn syrup. Yes, we were talking about the dangers of high fructose corn syrup way back in 1990, but nobody wants to give anybody credit for the fact that it was always in the document. It just never made it to the general public, mostly because you might remember in 1990, we didn't have the internet. It was not a document that was easily distributed in a mass and scalable way. So in 1995, you might recall that we had the Olympics, 96 in the United States in Atlanta. So we've got a nice Olympic looking ring here. And what we can see is that we are balancing the food that we eat with physical activity. This is the first time that we've seen this calories in, calories out messaging. We're choosing a plate with plenty of grain products, vegetables, and fruits, as well as a diet low in fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. We're eating a variety of foods. We're choosing a diet moderate in salt and sodium, as well as in sugars. And this was another one 2 years in a row where this word moderate came up. That nobody knew what it meant. And so the general population was seeing this word moderate and they're like, well, what does that mean? And this is where in 1995, the infamous pyramid that has been the football of the nutrition world for the past 30 years did in fact appear. Now, this is problematic because, as you can see, this pyramid doesn't actually reflect the language that is in the dietary guidelines themselves. So if you look at the bottom rung of this pyramid, which everybody is this is the spot that everybody gets really upset about, what you can see is we've got crackers and pasta and breads, and it looks like a lot of processed grains. And in fact, they say you should be having 6 to 11 servings. However, when you go in the guidelines, what it actually says is that your grains should be mostly whole, as we've seen over the last, 15 years of the iteration of the guidelines. And so I think, this is just me personally, that this is the first time that they brought in somebody that probably used whatever Canva was back in 1995, and they just didn't have good graphics to represent what was going on in the language of the guideline. And this is actually a really important call out because this mattered, as it turns out. And what we see even to this day is that this pyramid has been absolutely vilified, even though, as you'll see in just a moment, nobody ever actually followed these guidelines really. And we've got data to show that. So even though it is a graphic that really gets people riled up, this, it was in 1995. And I will also say it was only ever used for 2 iterations of the guidelines. So the pyramid sticks around for 2000. And now what we can see on the far left here is that the infographic has changed. So now we're aiming for a healthy weight. We're being physically active each day. Again, physical activity maintains a presence. We are letting the pyramid guide your food choices. So it's a call out to the pyramid. We are choosing a variety of grains daily, mostly whole grains. So we're calling out whole grains in the infographic specifically. We're choosing a variety of fruits and vegetables. And this is the first time that food safety makes an appearance in the guidelines, and it is called out from here on. And the other thing is to choose sensibly. We are choosing a diet that is low in saturated fat. We are choosing beverages and foods that are moderate in sugar, as well as sodium. The other thing that you can start to see emerge here is kind of a green light, yellow light theme, if you will. And so the idea is we want to cue people in to please choose these foods, please be careful with these, but the language itself doesn't quite align. That being said, when we look over to the right, what we can see is that the guidelines on whole grain foods are pretty similar as they have been over the past several iterations. The one thing to call out here that does end up changing in a future iteration is cholesterol. So if you look at that middle bullet here, it says foods that are high in cholesterol also tend to raise blood cholesterol. The foods include liver and other organ meats, egg yolks, and dairy fats. And this actually is a pretty significant point of controversy within the nutrition literature and the science itself, I mean, as well as the confusion for the general population. And what we've actually seen, which I think is accurately represented in the most recent dietary guidelines and had been changed a couple of iterations before, is that we've removed the cholesterol as a no-no food. As it turns out, it doesn't have that much of an impact on dietary cholesterol, on a blood level cholesterol, unless you already have high cholesterol, in which case you just don't want to add to the load of your cholesterol. But this idea of organ meats, egg yolks, and dairy fats, that is not really panning out in the literature to be particularly problematic unless you have a risk factor like cardiovascular disease already diagnosed, hypertension, or high cholesterol. All right, so in 2005, this is where I think people kind of like miss this iteration, is that the pyramid goes away. The pyramid that everybody has been so upset about actually has not been in use since 2005. So it's been over 20 years since we've seen this infographic in nutrition policy. Instead, we see this hot mess of a pyramid. So this one, we've changed the lines to be vertical rather than horizontal. And the way that I like to describe this to my students is it looks like a toddler came into a room and threw all of their plastic food toys onto the floor, and people were supposed to make sense of this. Honestly, if I'm being judgmental here, it looks a bit like the pyramid that was just released. It's kind of a hot mess of food all over the place. But this is really important to know, is that the old pyramid went away in 2005. We haven't used it in 20 years. Language has not changed that much, except for a little call out here is that we're choosing and preparing foods with little salt. So now we've got direction of choose, which is kind of permissive, but we're giving an amount. 2010, the pyramid goes away completely. So we have not had a pyramid in our nutrition policy for over 15 years. And yet, as you're going to see, it makes a comeback. In 2010, we are balancing our calories. So this is the first time calories have been recommended. We're enjoying our food, but we're eating less. This is right at the height of recognizing the obesity crisis is underway, avoiding oversized portions. And this is really interesting. So what we're seeing is an alignment now between the instructions of how to eat and the infographic that has replaced the pyramid. So in the foods to increase, we are making half of our plates fruits and vegetables. So you can see that's represented in my plate. And we're switching to fat-free or low-fat milk. Now, the reason for this had nothing to do necessarily with the fat content of the milk, but the calories. And so again, we're in this midst of recognizing there's an up and to the right tick to obesity and overweight, particularly in kids at this period of time. And so people were trying to keep nutritious food in the diet. We know milk is very nutritious, but reduce the total amount of calories. So that was the intention there. And then with foods to reduce, we are comparing foods like soup, bread, and frozen meals, which is where sodium tends to show up. And we are choosing the foods with lower numbers. So again, some really clear instructions for the very first time in the dietary guidelines here. And then lastly, this one was really interesting, drink water instead of sugary drinks. So in 2010, the committees, the politicians, the stakeholders, and the scientific committee came together and said, we need to give people better instructions. We need to give them a visual to show them how to actually set their plate up and actually teach them how to choose food that they are going to put onto their literal plate. 2015 gets a little wordy. I'm not going to read it out loud, but we are following a healthy eating pattern. We're focusing on variety, and nutrient density is a term that's being introduced, which means a lot of food for a little amount of calories, mostly from fruits and vegetables. We're limiting calories from added sugars and saturated fat, and we are reducing sodium intake. We are shifting to healthier food and beverage choices. That one got a lot of heat because it was really, again, very vague, especially after the 2010 dietary guidelines. And then we are supporting healthy eating patterns for all. So this one was really interesting because this is where you start to see an equity lens show up. up until this point, what we are seeing with the dietary guidelines is it's very sort of meat and potatoes. So it was have some protein, have a starch, have a veg, which is a very American way to eat, but that didn't really encompass the way that people were eating. So if you had a casserole, for example, or you were creating more ethnic food choices like a curry or a stew or something like that, it didn't look like my plate. And so this was the help and the intention here is that we're trying to sort of democratize the guidelines among different communities. Now, a big shift happened in the last dietary guidelines. This is the 2020 to 2025 guidelines. In this one, as you can see on the top left, we're introducing babies. So up until this point, the dietary guidelines had actually only been for people aged 2 and older. For the very first time in 2020, they made recommendations for toddlers and infants under the age of 2. And so this was super unique for the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines. Now we are entering the current phase. But before we do that, I just want to highlight something that I called out a few minutes ago. As I mentioned, we have been actually measuring how well people have been adhering to the guidelines themselves. We have a metric in nutrition called the Healthy Eating Index. The Healthy Eating Index is kind of like a score of 0 to 100. So you can think about it like a score that you might get on a test that actually measures how closely we are getting to these recommendations. And as it turns out, if we were to give each other a grade, we would all fail. So when we look across the lifespan, nobody is doing better than a 63. And when we look at adolescents and teenagers, they are particularly doing poorly when we talk about adhering to the dietary guidelines. And this matters because what we know is that if you teach kids to eat well, young, they are more likely to keep going with those behaviors later on in life. If they have a diagnosis of overweight or obesity as children, they are significantly more likely to carry that through their lifespan into adulthood. And so this is actually a really important call out is we can rail against the dietary guidelines as much as we want. There's nuance that shifts the language year to year to year, but at the end of the day, nobody has actually been following them. So there's room for improvement here to see if we can get people to actually do what the science is recommending. The other thing that I want to call out before we see this year's dietary guidelines are just a reminder that the pyramids have changed. We have not used the infamous Black pyramid since the year 2000, just to call that out. That's 25 years ago. There were 2 interim graphics that were meant for the general population. We've got a hot mess of the pyramid in the middle with all the kids' toys on the floor. And then we have a really clear direction of how to fill your plate. One other thing to call out here in the Choose My Plate is the cup of dairy milk. That is, again, just another place where we are clearly seeing that there is a lobby group because remember, the dietary guidelines said drink water and the dairy cup ends up on my plate. So again, just a place where you see the lobbyists and the political influence infiltrating the dietary guidelines. Now, as we finish off coming to the current guidelines, what we see is 2 screenshots here from the new website. So you remember you used to go to dietaryguidelines.gov, and now you go to realfood.gov to see the updated guidelines. And these are the 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines under Secretaries Rollin and Kennedy. And so what you can see is they have irreverently flipped over the pyramid. So now whole grains are down at the bottom, and it is a very small component of the pyramid, and the proteins and the vegetables end up on top. Now, a couple of things to call out where you can really see influence here is obviously up on the top left, we see a big steak. We have a container of chuck meat. I think that's hamburger meat up at the top. You've got a big thing of butter in the middle of the pyramid. This has never shown up in the pyramid before. And this is definitely where you can see the influence of the secretaries themselves, as well as likely the agricultural lobbyists for, the consumption of meat and dairy products. That being said, they're balanced out by whole fruits and vegetables on the other side. And so you could certainly make the argument here that the highlight of the fruits and vegetables is also super unique and new and takes up, the same amount on the actual pyramid itself. It also is quite clear what kind of foods we are looking for. That being said, it doesn't give you any kind of directionality on how much you should be eating, where should you be choosing from. And at the end of the day, it kind of vilifies whole grains. Now, the other thing to just call out here, and this is where politics really starts to become obvious. So this is a screenshot from the current realfood.gov on the right here. It says, for decades, we've been misled by guidance that prioritized highly processed food and are now facing rates of unprecedented chronic disease. So again, it's a little bit of nutrition gaslighting, maybe even a lot of nutrition gaslighting. Again, this pyramid has not been used for quite some time, over 25 years, and yet it's kind of being used as a foil or a straw man here to push the agenda of the current administration. If we were to look at the dietary guidelines, the words themselves, this is actually a couple of screenshots from the 9-page executive summary. Typically, as you'll remember, I said they are about 40 to 50 pages, and it really goes through a comprehensive understanding or executive summary of what the larger document says, which is really where all the nuts and bolts live for the guiding of these different programs. This year, it's only 9 pages, which I don't hate on that. It makes it really simple for people, especially if we're in an age where the internet is going to provide access to so many people of the guidelines themselves. But just some things to call out. The administration has been making headlines by saying that they were going to end the war on protein. I'm just going to roll my eyes a little bit here and say everything is about protein these days, and we all know it. We've all been seeing it. There is no war on protein. It's just a good tagline. That being said, it kind of gave them cover for changing the protein guidelines here. So what we see is that we are going to consume a variety of protein foods from animal sources, including eggs, poultry, seafood, red meat, as well as a variety of plant-sourced protein foods, including beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, and seeds. So if you go back to the 1980 version, you'll remember it started out talking about meat. They were talking about lean meat. In this cases, they're calling out animal sources and red meat first. So again, you can really see the cattle industry making a show here. On the far right, what you can also see is that we are changing the serving goals to 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. The current RDA, or the recommendation from the National Academy of Science and Medicine, is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. Now, this doesn't change that. It just kind of supersedes it as a good idea. If you were to change the dietary guidelines, the RDAs, which are the recommended daily allowances, that has really massive consequences on food labeling, on industry utilization of these guidelines. Those guidelines, the dietary reference intakes, are being updated as we speak, and they will likely reflect this range, but this does not actually change those RDAs. It just kind of puts them out into the world as a good idea. When we're talking about dairy, we have changed from including low-fat or skim milk dairy, 1%, to include full-fat dairy, so that has changed. I would argue probably loosely supported by the science. There doesn't seem to be major health differences between drinking the low-fat milk or the high-fat milk. It's also worth pointing out that full-fat dairy is only 3.5% milk fat, where 2% and 1% are that, 2 and 1%. So we're not changing the actual fat content that much. People are pretty surprised to hear that full-fat dairy only has 3.5% fat. And then the other thing that I think is funny that goes along with this is highlighted down the bottom left there, is that other options can include butter or beef tallow. I mean, you can hear the Health and Human Services Secretary's voice right there, right? This is very biased. There's no data on the face of the planet that shows that eating full fat butter or beef tallow instead of the unsaturated fats that come in oils like olive oil is going to be helpful for your health. In fact, most of the data says quite the contrary. So that is quite controversial for people and could be potentially problematic for people that are at risk for cardiovascular disease and other diseases that are related to fat consumption. So if we look at the key differences here on the right, we can see that we've got a new website. And one thing that I did not call out up until this point is that these new guidelines were actually derived from a completely different scientific committee than the one that I showed you in the beginning of this lecture. About 6-8 months ago, both secretaries threw out that group of 20 experts. They instituted their own. This is where this bias is starting to make a play. And they rewrote the scientific advisory committee report. So the report that all of those folks spent 2 years creating actually got scrapped at the last second. And this is where there's a lot of controversy with this particular dietary guidelines. The language itself hasn't changed dramatically, although if you go into the hundreds of pages, you can certainly see some disorganization and some clear non-expertise of writing that went into those guidelines themselves. But at the end of the day, the recommendations haven't shifted significantly short of these, full fat dairy recommendations. That being said, it is a really unprecedented precedent to throw out this scientific committee and all of the work that their team had done over the last 2 years. So that is a big bone of contention between the nutrition space, the nutrition scientists, and the policymakers that actually wrote the document themselves. Again, you see that we have this new upside down pyramid that's just kind of like, toys thrown on the floor. We see highlights of meat and this war on protein. We see increased protein requirements in full fat dairy. And then we see a pretty unprecedented endorsement of saturated fat. Now, if you want to go see all of these guidelines, you can go to realfood.gov. You have to scroll down to the bottom of the website, which is actually a pretty intense website. You got to scroll and it kind of like pops all over the place. So you got to dig for these. But if you go all the way to the bottom, you can find this little graphic. And what you can see is that you can access this 9-page report. You can access the calorie level by daily servings, the scientific foundation. And the scientific foundation is actually the new scientific guidelines, not the one that the scientists that had been appointed worked on. And the first couple of pages of this scientific committee is actually a checklist of what they agreed and disagreed with and what they included and didn't include. And this was really interesting because they kind of, in the first couple of paragraphs, said we cherry picked what we wanted to include and what we didn't. They were pretty transparent about it. And the other thing that they said is that they completely threw out the equity lens. So their recommendation in this current administration is that everybody should be treated the same and the guidelines should be interpreted the same by every group and every different ethnic community. So that's another bone of contention, and a hot topic is the equity of food is, certainly a problem that we have seen in the literature, in communities to communities, in different racial and ethnic groups. Access is a real problem. And so it is a big controversy that they've decided to say, we're scrapping the scientific report, we're cherry picking the outcomes, and we're completely removing this equity lens. The nutrition world has been pretty upset about that.